All right, welcome everybody. This is the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. I want to welcome everyone to our meeting, and we'll kick things off with a prayer. I'll ask Mr. McNeely to lead us in a prayer. Thank you.
Dear Lord, help us, guide us with wisdom and accuracy for the people that we serve, and be mindful of the unfortunate ones and our families back home as we proceed with deliberations to represent the people in the best interest in their lives for the Northwest Territories. Masi.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. McNeely. All right. We'll maybe also, for the record, I'd like to get things started by introducing our committee members. So I'll start at my far right.
R.J. Simpson, MLA, Hay River North.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Good afternoon, Danny McNeely, Satu.
Oh, that would be me. Cory Vanthuyne, MLA for Yellowknife North, and the chair of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment. We also have a number of staff here with us today. On my far right is, no, I know the name, I'm trying to think of the title again, is Committee Clerk Trainee Cynthia James, Committee Advisor Kathleen Kanuch. Our committee clerk is Mr. Michael Ball, and our law clerk is Sheila McPherson. So without further ado, today the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment is holding a public hearing on Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. The Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment is a committee of regular members of the Legislative Assembly. The bill we are reviewing today was introduced by the Minister, given first and second reading in the Legislative Assembly, and then referred to this Standing Committee for review. Legislation is typically brought forward by Cabinet and is reviewed by Standing Committee. The members of this committee are responsible for holding the government to account, and one of the ways we do this is by making sure that proposed laws are supported by the people of the Northwest Territories. It is our responsibility to consult with residents on what they like or don't like about the bills. We would like to hear your views and comments, which will be used by the committee to identify any changes we would like to see made or to the draft legislation, and which we will then report back to our colleagues in the Assembly. I wish to briefly describe the intent of this bill. Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, proposes to establish new legislation that will repeal and replace the Purchasing Management Association Act to reflect the name change from NWT Institute Purchasing Management Association of Canada to Supply Chain Management Association Northwest Territories. Also, change the professional designation in English and French to align with the name change and the designation, and protect the designation in the NWT. For those who haven't already helped themselves, there are copies of the bills on the side table, so we ask that you please grab some of those. If you'd like to share your views with us today, please let the clerk know, and I'm aware of one individual that will be presenting, Ms. Benita Noel, and we'll hear from her shortly. One final piece of housekeeping, please remember that all submissions will be part of official committee records and may also be televised or broadcast via social media. Thank you everyone for your patience in allowing this introduction. With members' agreement, I will now invite Minister Wally Schuman to make any opening remarks on the bill. Following the Minister's remarks, committee members may make comments or pose questions on the bill. Do members agree? All right, thank you, committee. Mr. Schuman, if you may, please introduce your staff and for the record and proceed with any opening remarks you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll go right into my comments as it introduces my staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for inviting us here to review and discuss details of Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. With me today are John Vandenberg, Assistant Deputy Minister with the Department of Infrastructure, Kyle LaRue, Senior Legislative Advisor, Laura Jeffrey, Legislative Counsel with the Department of Justice, and I'd also like to welcome Bonita Noel. She is the President of the Supply Chain Management Association, Northern Territories. The Northwest Territories is a remote and decentralized jurisdiction. Accordingly, when goods, people, and information need to be transported to or from the Northwest Territories, there are unique logistical challenges. The folks who solve these challenges are the supply chain management professionals. In the Northwest Territories, supply chain management professionals are licensed by the Supply Chain Management Association, Northern Territories. This association sets the standards for excellence in ethics and is the source of professional development and accreditation for supply chain management in the 3 territories. Prior to 2013, the Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories was called the Northwest Territories Institute of Purchasing Management Association of Canada. Along with this change in 2013, the Certified Professional Purchaser designation was renamed to Supply Chain Management Professional. The new Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, which replaces the Purchasing Management Association Act, reflects these name changes. In addition, it will continue to ensure that only supply chain management professionals licensed by the Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories are entitled to hold themselves out as a professional in the field of the supply chain management. The government of the Northwest Territories values the hard work of supply chain management professionals, who are imperative to the region's ongoing economic development. The provision of health services and the transportation of food and supplies, among many other things. The proposed new Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act recognizes this hard work and will modernize and update the Purchasing Management Associations Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. Now I'll turn it over to committee for any comments, questions from committee. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Are there any transitional provisions either in the bill or what happens with the previous designations, people that had that designation and moving towards the new designation that this bill provides? Is there any transitional provisions in here that allow for that to happen? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Vandenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those who held the professional designation of professional designation prior to the name change will be granted the new designation, the new name, and the new certificate, recognized as professionals in the Northwest Territories.
Thank you. Further, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Can I just ask the advice of our law clerk on this matter? Thanks,
Certainly.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The ADM is exactly right. The designation given to individuals prior to the coming into force of this act is carried over, and they are allowed to use that designation if they're already certified when this bill comes into force. So it doesn't affect the designation. In fact, the existing these professionals are already designated now. This bill simply changes the name of the organization. It doesn't affect, as I understand it, the credentialing process for those individuals involved.
Thank you. Further, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that clarification. Look, I don't want to hold this bill up in any way. We've been waiting 6 years for it. So can the minister explain why it took that long to bring the bill forward? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Just give me 1 second, Mr. Chair.
Minister Schuman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The delay was caused by competing priorities within the Department of Infrastructure and former Department of Public Works and Services. The delay was not resulted in any issues of concern because there have been no complaints in the intervening years that persons were intervening years that persons have violated the terms of the Purchasing Management Association Act. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything further from committee? Okay, if there's nothing further from committee, does committee agree that we'll now open the floor to comments from the public? Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Thank you, Minister. I'll ask you to just move off from the witness table for now, and we're going to be calling you back in a moment's time. Okay, on my list, first public presenter, I'd like to call upon Ms. Benita Noel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank you, Mr.
Noel, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories Board of Directors, I thank the members today for your review and consideration on revision of our bill. I am the president of Supply Chain Management Association Northern Territories Institute, and the Institute, as I've indicated in my letter, is part of the National Supply Chain Management Association of Canada, and as such, the association sets standards for excellence and ethics and is a principal source of professional development and accreditation for supply chain management in the Northwest Territories. Our former name, the NWT Institute, PMAC, affectionately, we changed the name a few years ago in collaboration with the Government of the Northwest Territories Department of Infrastructure. The Board of Directors and I are pleased that the Legislative Assembly is considering the repeal and to replace the Purchasing Management Association Act to align with our name change. I thank Minister Schuman and the Department of Infrastructure as well for their hard work and collaboration with us on this important work. After reviewing the bill, we are satisfied that the wording in the Supply Chain Management Association, our Professional Designation Act, addresses our concerns. On behalf of the Board of Directors, we support the bill. We believe it will effectively protect the designation used by the supply chain management professionals in the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your submission, Ms. Noel, and at this time I'll turn it over to committee. Any comments, questions from committee for the presenter? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's any other members from the public that wish to present today? Going once, going twice, seeing none. Seeing no further witness submissions, does committee agree to proceed with a clause-by-clause review of Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act? Thank you, committee. I'll ask the minister to please return to the witness table. Okay, committee has agreed to conduct a clause-by-clause review of Bill 35. Let's turn to page 1 of the bill. We will defer the bill number and title until after consideration of the clauses. All right, committee, clause 1. Agreed. Clause 2. Clause 3. Clause 4. Clause 5. And Clause 6. Thank you. We will now return to the bill number and title, Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. The bill as a whole, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Does committee agree that Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act is now ready for consideration in committee of the whole? Agreed. Thank you. Just one moment. Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in the committee of the whole. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Bill 35, Supply Chain Management Professional Designation Act, will be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Committee. Thank you, Minister Schuman, and thanks to your staff. Do you have any other further closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to thank committee again for working on us through this bill, and we look forward to bringing it to the floor of the House and having it passed in this legislative assembly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister. So on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank everybody who joined us today. As MLAs, it's certainly a privilege to be here and hear from you directly. And with that, we can now be adjourned. Thank you.